Welcome back everybody to another episode of Direct Comparison. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at Forever Entertainment's HD port of the barrel-blasting platforming classic Donkey Kong Country Returns, and see how it compares to the original Wii release of the game, first made available nearly 15 years ago. For today's video, the newly released DK Country Returns HD is being captured on a standard Nintendo Switch, while the original game is being captured on a Wii U, which should provide the clearest possible image capture for comparison, without having to resort to any unofficial mods or emulation techniques. Also, before we get started, be sure to subscribe to the channel for more direct comparison videos like this one, along with reviews, special previews, and in-depth documentaries, including a documentary on the entire Donkey Kong Country series. I'll have a link to that video provided below in the description. Alright, let's kick this comparison off by first taking a look at the quality of the character models. Now, right away, the first thing that's likely to stand out to you when viewing this is just how much sharper the characters appear on the Switch. With the jump to HD, the pixel density is unsurprisingly much higher with this latest release, providing a much more crisp and clear image across the board, and less aliasing than the previous 480 output we were stuck with before. Though there were a few other small tweaks that were made outside of the improved resolution. For one, the color of the character's fur appears a little darker on the Switch, which is more in line with his other appearances in the more recent Tropical Freeze. The ends of Donkey's fur sleeves that previously had these angled notches at the end have been removed, as the fur itself now sports a higher quality shader effect, along with superior light interaction that gives it a more dense and furry appearance on screen. Other, more subtle details like the improved texture work for his nostrils and ears have also been implemented, along with some slightly better shadowing along his brow, hands, and chest. Diddy Kong sports many of these same improvements, with higher res textures for the smaller details like his signature Nintendo hat, along with those improved fur shaders. As for the game's various enemies, they've seen some minor improvements as well, with reworked textures, brighter, more crisp coloration, and even some reworked shaders when it's called for. Some of these enemies do appear a bit dated, and these small tweaks don't necessarily do much to improve the overall design, but it's at least consistent with Retro Studios' original vision, and is at the very least cleaned up a bit. Next, let's talk about the environments. Thanks to the improved resolution and color density, the island in Donkey Kong Country Returns HD looks absolutely gorgeous on the Nintendo Switch, with every decorative asset popping vibrantly on the screen, all with greatly reduced aliasing that was so commonplace in the original release. Smaller details like grass, ferns, and other vegetation now appear nice and clean in the background, allowing the details behind them to stand out more prominently, which in turn helps to boost the overall depth of every scene. Additionally, new high-res textures have also been incorporated in many instances, especially on details like these rocks, the sandy beaches, stone walls, and all the many tree canopies throughout. There's even some rare instances where new objects and models have been thrown in, like these additional tree vines at the start of this level, or some of the reworked skyboxes and backdrops that are occasionally visible through the foreground. Now, these latter changes are a bit hit or miss, as there's instances where the newer backdrops lack the same depth and complexity of the old Wii versions. They always look sharper and cleaner on the Switch, but things like these rocky sea stacks dotting the background of this scene don't give the same impression of distance as the old versions. There are even some occasional textures in the foreground that don't appear to be as well detailed, like this tree here, that, while more colorful and sharper around the edges, does seem to be missing some of that wood grain that was present on the individual segments before. My guess is that this is the result of trying to upgrade the already visually altered version of the game released back in 2013 for the 3DS. Thankfully, more often than not, the environmental assets are an improvement. This is the same case with the game's lighting design, which has been altered very slightly in nearly every level. As mentioned previously, a lot of the game's textures have been redone, as were the general colorations of these surfaces, to evoke a much more colorful presentation overall. This makes scenes like this one stand out considerably more in the remaster, with the slightly cloudy, washed out look of the Wii version being replaced with vibrant, clearly defined color variety with each individual plant, rock, and creature on screen. This is especially noticeable when looking at these bright palms and the grass lining the main path, as they are much brighter on screen, almost to the point of glowing, contributing a lot to the general HD feel of the game. There is one area in particular that is oddly missing a background lighting effect, very prominently featured in the original Wii version. Though, considering a similar effect is present in this silhouette level shortly after, and looks to be improved over the dithered effect used before, its exclusion from this temple section is possibly a mistake rather than an intentional change. Other occasional light rays in certain levels have also been improved with the remaster, with additional light rays being added into certain levels, along with improved caustic simulation in areas like this one, when near a body of water. Though, aside from some more vibrant materials and the occasional light ray, the general tone, look, and feel of Donkey Kong Country Returns remains intact, and is handled more or less the same as before. Like the textures and pre-lit material rendering, the shadowing is very much baked in, and does benefit from the improved pixel density as well. Drop shadows on details like leaves are more visible in this version, and additional shadows have been added to certain background features like this large temple here. The main character shadows remain standard discs that are slightly softer and lighter than before. However, I was surprised to find that, for whatever reason, the Switch version seems to only use disc shadows, even during the cutscenes, whereas the Wii version did have more appropriate shadow cast for its characters, as seen here. This too could have been the result of reworking the 3DS version of the game, rather than the original Wii version, though it's unclear exactly why the shadows couldn't be restored for this version, considering the engine should have been the same. Effects are where things get a little bit more interesting. Now, while most of the stylized effects used for things like collecting objects and beating up enemies remain stylistically the same, they do have a few enhancements, with some higher quality alpha layers, additional particles for things like these dandelions, and better smoke and fire effects. Some effects, like Donkey's trail when launching from barrels, have been tweaked slightly, with what looks like a toned-down rainbow effect from the initial blast, and a new red alpha layer that is likely used to help keep track of the character more easily during fast barrel platforming sequences. The real standout, though, is the water rendering. The water has been given a complete makeover in the remaster, with a new shader and texture applied that gives it a slightly more realistic look. This is a surprising choice given the game's more cartoon-like art direction, and I'm not necessarily sure it's an improvement either. This level with the deadly rogue waves also looks a bit off now, as the darker surface of the water previously, coupled with the white foam along the inside of the wave, seemed to fit the art style of the environment better than the more complex-looking water effects used now. That being said, I love how the water looks with these decorative waterfalls now, especially with the more vibrant coloration and brightness that helps them stand out more prominently from the background assets. And the individual water rendering itself is a big improvement over the low-res effects used prior. Finally, let's wrap up with a brief sound comparison. Which version of DK Country Returns do you feel offers the best audio quality and design? And that wraps up this episode of Direct Comparison. Overall, Donkey Kong Country Returns HD on the Nintendo Switch is a big improvement visually over its 2010 predecessor, with a higher resolution, improved character and environmental complexity, and a few tweaked effects that often look better than those that came before them. This release also comes with all the perks of the 2013 3DS release too, including bonus levels and the modern difficulty setting. Also, I'm happy to finally be done with the old Wiimote controls of the original, and can simply just tap the X or Y buttons instead. There does appear to be a motion control option in the settings that should work with the nunchuck controllers, though personally, I found I had better control over the characters using a traditional Switch Pro controller instead. However, it is worth noting the unacceptable performance of this remaster, as I was disappointed to find that the game seems to drop frames constantly in nearly every level. This is especially noticeable in more complex sequences like boss battles, that usually require very precise movement to pass successfully, an issue that simply wasn't present on the original Wii version. Another issue with the HD release is the noticeably longer loading times. There's obviously a lot more to be loaded with the increased resolution and updated assets, but it's frustrating nonetheless. Now, considering how minimal the improvements overall are for this remaster, coupled with the fact that Tropical Freeze doesn't suffer from these issues either, I feel it's fair to say that there's still work to be done on this remaster before it can be considered a proper replacement for the original game. But what do you guys think? Do you like the improvements that were made with the remaster, or do you still prefer the original version? Let me know in the comments section. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this posted every week.